The relay was dying, and I didn't know it yet, and somewhere a caste of translucent strangers was singing the last prayer their ancestors had ever taught them, into a silence that had swallowed every prayer before it. I only knew the alarm in my own ear, a static-tuned signal looping through 3 frequencies at once, half of it liturgical chant and half of it the unmistakable rising-falling cadence of a medical distress beacon, badly translated through some ancient relay that had never been built to carry both at the same time. I was off duty. I was 40 minutes from a hot shower and a rack I hadn't seen in 11 days. My Cutters-Nav board told me the signal source was a derelict Prayer Station 3 systems off my filed course, designated on no chart I had clearance for, broadcasting on a frequency band reserved for nothing currently classified as occupied. I diverted anyway. I didn't call it in. There wasn't time to wait for someone with more rank than me to decide whether a corpsman was allowed to follow a hunch. The station hung in the dark like something built by people who'd once believed light itself was sacred, a lattice of translucent silicate ribs wrapped around a central atrium, threaded end to end with conduits that should have glowed and now flickered, dimming in slow pulses like a heartbeat losing its rhythm. I'd seen dying reactors before. I'd seen dying ships. I had never seen a building breathing its last breath in failing light, and some part of me understood, before I understood anything else about them, that for whoever lived inside, the dark wasn't just dark. It was the silence finally winning. My Cutter's docking clamp barely fit their airlock. I went in with a medkit, a sidearm I never drew, and no idea what I was walking into. What I found were the Vethral. They were tall and impossibly thin, skin like frosted glass with veins of soft color running beneath it, veins that brightened and dimmed as they spoke, so that their voices and their light were the same thing, indivisible, a language I'd never have a name for. There were 11 of them left in the atrium, robed in pale fiber that did nothing to hide how faint their light had become. They turned toward me in a single slow motion, like a wave deciding whether to break, and the eldest of them, a Vethral whose veins ran the color of an ember about to go out, said something low and resonant that needed no translation. It was disbelief. It was the sound of someone who has stopped expecting an answer and gets one anyway. I heard your relay, I said, because it was the only honest thing I had. I'm a medic. I'm going to need you to show me where it hurts, the building, I mean, and anyone who isn't standing. They didn't move at first. I understood later that they thought I'd misheard, that I was some lost signal myself, an accident, not an answer, because 3 generations of choir fathers had sent that same prayer frequency plea outward, to gods their ancestors swore once listened, to allied castes who had stopped returning their calls, to anyone, and nothing had ever come back. Not a ship. Not a reply. Not even silence with the courtesy of an explanation. The eldest, I'd learn his title was Ren Vaskalan, speaker of the last choir, raised one trembling hand toward the failing conduits ringing the atrium, then toward a low door behind him, and I understood that as an answer good enough to start with. Behind that door were the ones who couldn't stand. For Vethral lay on pallets in a chamber lit only by the conduits still holding their color, and 3 of them had skin gone the dull gray of cooling glass, the color, I'd guess now, of a body running out of whatever passed for blood in a species built from light. The 4th was a child, or what I took for a child by the smallness of her veins flickering arrhythmic and frantic, like a heartbeat trying to outrun something it couldn't see. I didn't have time to be moved by any of it. I knelt. My kit wasn't built for them. No scanner I owned had ever indexed Vethral physiology. No drug in my case had a dosage chart for translucent flesh lit from within. So I did the only thing field medicine ever really teaches you. I treated the symptom in front of me and adjusted as I learned. Their light dimmed when their core temperature dropped. That much I guessed inside of a minute, watching the way the grey crept in faster near the chamber's coldest wall. I redirected 3 of my own thermal packs, cannibalized the casing off my Cutter's spare battery to jury-rig a heat coil, and packed it against the youngest one's side while Ren Vaskalan hovered at the doorway, his light flickering in a pattern I'd later learn meant something close to please, in whatever grammar light could carry. Talk to her, I told him, not looking up. Whatever you'd sing at a funeral, don't sing that. Sing whatever you'd sing to wake somebody up. He didn't understand the words. He understood the gesture, the urgency in my hands, and he knelt at the child's other side and began something low, rising, deliberately not mournful, and I watched her veins answer it, not healed, not yet, but listening, the way a fire that's almost out will sometimes lean toward a draft instead of dying from it. One of the other 3 wasn't listening to anything. His name, I'd learn later, was Dren Seralvor, a relay tender who'd spent 40 years keeping the conduits fed, and his light had gone past grey into something closer to ash, no flicker at all, just a faint persistent dimness like a coal buried too deep to catch a draft. I checked for a pulse the way I'd check on a human and found nothing I recognized as one, and for 3 seconds I thought I'd lost him before I'd even started. Then I noticed his hands. They were still warm, warmer than the rest of him, warmer than they should have been if his whole system had simply stopped, and I understood, the way you understand something only by betting your patient's life on it, that the warmth was pooling there because his body was rationing itself, starving everywhere else to keep one extremity alive. I packed heat against his chest instead of his hands, against every instinct that told me to chase the warmth I could already see, and pushed a stim cartridge I'd never tested on anything but human tissue into the meat of his shoulder, because a dying current needs a jolt before it needs comfort. His light came back in a single ragged pulse, bright enough that Ren Vaskalan made a sound I hadn't heard from him yet, sharp, involuntary, half a name and half a prayer he didn't finish. "Don't thank me yet," I said, already moving to the next pallet. "He's not stable. He's just not gone." I worked through what should have been my whole sleep cycle and didn't notice the hours. I found that warmth alone wasn't the fix. Their light, I came to understand by the second hour, ran on something closer to a current than a pulse, and the failing conduits ringing the atrium weren't just architecture. They were circulatory. The station and the choir were the same dying system, wired into each other in a way no human structure had ever been wired into its inhabitants, and the relay wasn't broadcasting their prayer so much as bleeding it out, the building's own failing heart pushing one last signal into the dark with the same current it needed to keep its people's skin alight. So I fixed the building. It took the rest of that day and most of the next, with 2 of the Vethril, steadier now, the grey retreating from their hands, translating diagrams for me with light patterns I learned to read like a second alphabet, points of brightness meaning yes, slow fades meaning wait, a sudden flare meaning here, exactly here. I spliced power from my own cutter's reserve cell into their failing primary conduit, not because I understood their engineering, but because current is current and a coupling is a coupling in any language, and somewhere in that splice the building's pulse steadied into something almost like a heartbeat that intended to keep going. It nearly didn't hold. 6 hours into the splice, the coupling I jury-rigged threw a surge back through my own cutter's reserve cell instead of the other way around, and every conduit in the atrium flared white-hot for 1 heartbeat before the whole ring went dark at once. Not dim, not flickering, dark, the first true dark that station had seen since I'd arrived. Somewhere behind me I heard 11 Vethril make a sound I never want to hear again, a low collective note that wasn't grief yet but was rehearsing for it. I didn't have time to be afraid of the dark either. I tore the coupling loose with my bare hands before it could cook itself, swapped the polarity I'd had backward since the start, a rookie's mistake, the kind you make at our 30 without sleep, and fed the current back through clean. The ring caught on the second try, slower this time, climbing back up through grey into ember into something steadier than it had been before the surge. Nobody behind me made a sound until the colour held for a full 10 seconds. Then Ren Vaskalan exhaled, and so did I, and neither of us mentioned it again. The child woke fully on the second day. Her name, near as light could carry it, was something like a low-rising note repeated twice. I called her Liz, because I had to call her something, and she liked the sound of it enough to repeat it back to me in her own glowing accent. "You came," Ren Vaskalan said to me, once the worst of it had passed and his own light had steadied back toward Ember Orange. He'd learned enough of my language by then, traded for it across 2 days of pointing and patience, to put it plainly. We called the choir fathers. We called every ally who once answered. Nothing came. Then you came, and you are not a god, and you are not an ally we have a treaty with, and I do not understand why you are here. I wasn't sent, I told him. I just heard you. He looked at that answer the way a man looks at a number that doesn't balance, turning it over, searching for the larger fleet behind it, the formal order, the higher authority that must have dispatched me, because nothing in 3 generations of unanswered prayer had prepared him for an answer this small and this solitary. I watched him search for it and not find it, and something in his light went very still. "There is no one else coming," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the shape of an old fear, finally being tested against a fact. "No," I said. "Just me. I'm not staying, either. I've got a course to get back to, and people who'll ask questions about why I went dark for 4 days. But your relay's stable now. Your power coupling will hold for years if nobody touches the splice. And Liz's fever broke this morning, so you can stop hovering over her like she's made of glass. She isn't. She's tougher than that." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his light didn't flare into anything grand or ceremonial. No reverence, no rule of 3 blessing, none of the rising chorus I half expected from a cast built around prayer. Instead it dimmed, slow and deliberate, into the same pattern I'd learned, over 4 days, to read as please, except this time it carried no urgency in it at all. Just gratitude, worn down to its plainest form. "We have no gift that would mean anything to you," he said. "You don't owe me one," I said, and meant it. "Just don't let the conduit run cold again. Check the splice every season. That's the whole debt." I left on the 4th day, towing nothing, escorted by nothing, with no record filed anywhere that would explain to a board of inquiry why a corpsman on routine transit had vanished off her course for 4 days and come back with light station grease under her fingernails. Liz stood at the airlock window as I undocked, her small light steady now, pulsing once in a pattern Ren Varskallen had taught me just before I left. Not a word exactly, closer to a single-held note that meant, near as I could translate it, *remembered. I never told my command what those 4 days cost me in unlogged hours. I never told the Vethral that I wasn't anyone important, that there was no fleet behind me, no order, no chain of command that had sent me there on purpose, that the whole of Earth's answer to 3 generations of unanswered prayer had been one tired medic who happened to be listening on the right frequency at the wrong time, and decided that was reason enough to stop and look. I think that's the part Ren Varskallen understood better than I did, in the end. Not that someone powerful had finally heard them. Just that someone had, and that the someone hadn't needed to be anything more than that to matter.